Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Something needs to be said about the idea that red pill theory is a reactionary movement in response to feminism. Because feminism is itself a reactionary movement in response to endemic biases in Western civilization against women. Red pill theories, therefore, are not new to the West. They have a long history connected to extremely anti-woman concepts in Christianity and the rules and creed of the church. Red pill theory is really just a resurgence of those contemptuous attitudes towards women that have always existed in the West. They just have a new quasi-scientific slant to them instead of a biblical slant. Whereas before it was Eve and original sin, now it's evolutionary psychology and women's calculating hypergamous nature. None of this, it should be obvious, has anything to do with us, anything to do with our history or our deen. When the European Christians first encountered Muslim society during the Crusades, they were shocked at the rights and respect that Islam granted to women, because for them, they treated women basically like chattel. The early days of feminism in the West weren't without justification. Once they got what they wanted, and they did, the movement went off the rails, as is usually the case with a social movement that achieves its aims but fails to dissolve. Feminism has no place in Islam, but we do have to be objective about the reality that individual and cultural gender biases do exist and have long existed among Muslim populations around the world. Red pill theory appeals mostly to those Muslims who themselves do hold those biases. And unfortunately, anyone who points out that these views are incorrect is mislabeled as a Muslim feminist, even if all they're doing is affirming the rights that Islam actually does accord to women. But more serious in my view than the existence of gender biases among Muslims is the phenomenon of young Muslim men distorting or straight up rejecting qawama. And this, I think, has more to do with the permeation of materialistic, capitalistic thinking among the youth, because this is fundamentally connected to a lack of remembrance of the akhirah. We have young men today who seem to think that qawama is fundamentally unfair. They think that all of the duties and responsibilities assigned to men are unjust. They'll say, we want the authority that comes with all of these duties and responsibilities, otherwise it's just slavery. Well, first of all, you are a slave, and thinking that you're not is going to cause you a lot of problems in your life as a Muslim. But second of all, Islam does give you significant authority, as do the basic natural advantages that you have as a man. And of course, in real life, there is a causal connection between you fulfilling your responsibilities and the authority that is established through doing so. When you are providing for, protecting, caring for, solving problems for, and otherwise benefiting your wife, unless she is a severely self-destructive person, she will both appreciate and voluntarily adhere to your guidance, simply because it makes sense to do so. The Thomasine are obsessed with proving the religious and legal obligation of wives to obey their husbands, as if that's the only way that you can ever get a wife to obey her husband, as if they want to establish their unqualified right to obedience, because otherwise it's something that they could never hope to earn through being genuine leaders. But of course, the reality is that patriarchy is not a social construct. It is a reflection of the unavoidable and irreducible natural dynamic between the sexes. Men possess the capability to compel obedience, and if they choose not to do so, it's either through their own compassion or, more likely, because the disobedience that they're supposed to deal with is actually too trivial to even bother with. In most matters of consequence, wives do obey their husbands out of their own sensibleness, their own self-interest, and their own taqwa. If a man needs the force of the law behind him in order to extract obedience from his wife, then I don't think he's going to be a very effective qawam even with the law on his side. There seems to me to be far too much emphasis on proving that men are above women, instead of men remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above them and that they are his slaves and that they have to do what they're told. Men need to focus on their own obligation to be obedient and to please their Lord in what they like and what they dislike, and what pleases them and what displeases them. I've seen a number of people mentioning the hadith in which Umar bin al-Khattab complained about how the Ansari women talked back to their husbands more than the women of the Quraysh did, as if just mentioning this story proves that the attitude and the behavior of the Ansari women was wrong and blameworthy. But they overlooked the fact that Rasulullah ﷺ had literally nothing whatsoever to say in response to Umar's complaints. And the fact that the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen themselves behaved this way. You may not like it, but Islam did not give you any recourse against women who do behave that way. And that's why we have later stories of Umar bin al-Khattab when he was the Khalifa, dealing with his own wives, talking back to him. So if you want to know how Umar interpreted the reaction of Rasulullah ﷺ to his complaints, there it is. Like it or not, your humility and humbleness as a slave of Allah extends to your treatment of your wife. Now, I know many of you always want me to talk about how sisters are also obligated to be pious and to be submissive and good and so on. But this is not a channel directed towards sisters. This is a channel dedicated to the issue of qawama. It's ironic to me how much of the content on the manosphere is directed towards castigating women, as if they're the target demographic audience for the manosphere. Look, women are going to be women. They're going to gripe, they're going to complain, they're going to talk back. Sometimes they're going to be rebellious. You can't attribute all of that to feminism. That's just women being women. The women of the Ansar never read feminist doctrine. You just have to learn how to deal with it appropriately, Islamically, according to the Sunnah. And yes, men have a higher degree of responsibility than women, and you are accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that, and your reward for that is with Him. If your wife displeases you, is it not sufficient for you to know that the Hur al-Ain are scolding her on your behalf and that they themselves will compensate you for whatever inconvenience or dissatisfaction you endured patiently in the dunya? But again, the akhirah seems to be entirely missing from the Tomasiyin perspective. The whole ideology is dunya focused, even in terms of what it means to them to be the best version of yourself and the definition of what a high value man is. It's all dunya related. This is a surefire recipe to make you the worst version of yourself and to make you a low value man in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do not need any guidance further than the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in how to deal with women, how to deal with your wife, how to exercise qawama. Nor do you need anything outside of Islam for establishing justice and fairness between the sexes. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was sent to perfect manners and therefore to perfect the approach to human relations. Red pill can add nothing to that but defects. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum.